welcome to the debate. I want to ask you to imagine something for a moment.
Okay, go ahead.
Imagine a stranger, like someone from a completely different part of the world, just decided one day to write the history of your civilization.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they decide to write it in a language you don't even speak.
That's a pretty unsettling thought, especially if we, take it a step further. What if they didn't just write it for their own amusement? What if they actually used that written history to define your identity, to sort of categorize how your mind works, and ultimately to rule your people?
Exactly. I mean, imagine this stranger does all of this without knocking on your door, without asking your opinion, and really without giving you any right to respond.
Right.
How would it feel to read your own life story, written with a pen that was, specifically designed to erase your voice? It is a terrifying concept.
It really is.
Because when someone else has the power to define you so completely, they effectively own you.
It's a profound existential theft, really. And that chilling scenario is basically the foundation of our discussion today.
Yeah, it is.
We're looking at one of the most influential and honestly fiercely debated texts of the 20th century, Edward Said's landmark 1978 book, Orientalism.
Said's work was, frankly, an intellectual earthquake. I mean, he advanced the thesis that the East, what historical Europe referred to as the Orient, is not merely a geographic location.
Right, it's an idea.
Exactly. It is an invention. It's a construct shaped, defined, and maintained by the West, basically to serve imperial power and dominance. Orientalism, in Said's view, is a structured system. It literally weaponized academic knowledge to justify colonization.
And that brings us to our central question for today, right? Is the East solely a manufactured tool of Western control, as Said argues, or does his framework kind of fall into the trap of oversimplification, by claiming that knowledge can never, under any circumstances, be separated from power?
Well, I'll be taking the position that Said is fundamentally correct. Orientalism is a system of hegemony that inextricably linked the scholar's pen to the conqueror's sword.
And I will be taking the position that while Said brilliantly exposes the mechanics of colonial justification, his framework is ultimately incomplete.
How so?
By insisting that all Western study of the East is inherently tainted by this imperial drive to dominate, he ends up erasing genuine scholarly achievements. The scientific breakthroughs and the profound human curiosity that actually existed alongside those colonial structures.
Well, let's start with how this system actually works, just to lay the groundwork. Orientalism is fundamentally built on what we call essentialism.
Right.
And if you're listening to this and wondering what essentialism means in this context, it's basically a system that takes millions of people with incredibly diverse, complex histories across vast continents and, forces them into a single, rigid box.
A box labeled the Eastern mind.
Precisely.
And it simultaneously constructs a contrasting box, right? Labeled the Western mind.
Exactly. And in the writings of 19th century British imperial administrators, people like Lord Cromer or Arthur James Balfour, who were literally managing empires in places like Egypt and India, the European is consistently framed as rational, advanced, mature, and active, while the Oriental, on the other hand, is framed as irrational, backward, childlike, and passive.
Yeah, the contrast is stark.
Very. And this wasn't just some neutral academic exercise in observation, It was deeply functional. If you can scientifically prove that a certain population is childlike and fundamentally incapable of self-rule,
then you've provided the ultimate moral justification for ruling them.
Exactly.
Because you're just acting as their parent or their guide.
Precisely. This is how power operates at its most sophisticated level. It relies on what the philosopher Antonio Gramsci called hegemony.
Right, cultural dominance.
Yeah.
Hegemony isn't just about rolling tanks across a border or, enforcing your will with military force. It's about cultural leadership. It's about manufacturing consent, creating a system of belief where the dominance of the West over the East feels natural, inevitable, and scientifically justified to everyone.
Okay, I hear that. And I don't deny the reality of those power dynamics, not at all. Nor do I deny that figures like Cromer and Balfour definitely used that essentialist language to justify their administrative grip.
Right.
But we run into a severe problem when we paint all Western scholarship with that exact same broad, imperial brush.
You think it's too broad?
I do. There is a critical blind spot in Said's framework, and it's actually one that he himself acknowledges early in the book, the omission of German scholarship.
Ah, you're talking about the philological revolution. I am. For those unfamiliar, philology is the study of language in historical texts. Tracing how languages evolve and connect over centuries.
Right.
During the 19th century, German intellectuals, figures like Franz Bopp and Friedrich Schlegel, made monumental contributions to comparative linguistics, to the study of Sanskrit, and to Islamic studies.
They did, yes.
And here is the crucial detail. Germany, at that specific time, had absolutely no colonial ambitions in the Near East. They had no imperial footprint there.
No direct presence, true.
So if we claim that all Orientalism is a direct function of the desire to conquer and manage foreign lands, how do we explain the Germans? Their work proves that genuine intellectual curiosity, the drive to understand language families, it can exist independently of imperial dominance.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how power actually circulates. The distinction you are making between pure academic knowledge and political knowledge, it's an illusion.
How is it an illusion if they weren't conquering anybody?
Because they were relying on the people who were. Let's break down the mechanism of how a German linguist in Berlin or Leipzig was actually able to study ancient Sanskrit texts.
Okay.
Those manuscripts, the cultural wealth, the lexicons, they were extracted and made available to European universities precisely because of British and French hegemony in the East.
Well,
The British East India Company loots or purchases texts, sends them back to Europe, and the German scholar studies them. The scholar didn't hold a rifle, sure, but they were the direct beneficiary of the person who did.
Right, I get that, but I come at it from a different way. I agree that knowledge always exists within a political context. Nobody works in a vacuum.
Exactly.
And yes, the supply chains of academia were totally tied to the realities of empire. But context is not the same thing as contamination. The utility or the sourcing of a piece of knowledge does not automatically render the knowledge itself inherently false.
But it shapes the questions being asked. Think of it like this. Imagine a highly complex, brilliantly executed study on the economic viability of long-term Soviet energy potential.
Okay.
And imagine it is funded by the Defense Department during the Cold War. Now, the mathematician crunching the numbers might be doing purely objective math.
Right.
But the existence of that study, the reason those specific questions are being asked, and the way that data will be utilized are fundamentally political. The same is true for the humanities.
But let's stick with your analogy for a second. We have to be able to separate the sociological conditions of the researcher from the epistemological truth of their research.
So to put that in plain terms for our listeners, you're basically saying that the math is still the math regardless of who is holding the calculator.
Exactly. The calculator might have been bought by a defense contractor, but 2 + 2 is still 4. If a German philologist discovers that the Indo-European languages share a common root with Sanskrit, that is an objective linguistic reality. The fact that an empire might later use cultural theories to justify rule, or that an empire provided the text, that doesn't invalidate the grammatical discovery itself.
But that is exactly where the dynamic becomes so dangerous. The math, as we're calling it, isn't just innocent numbers when you are dealing with human cultures.
Okay, but
Let's look at the historical moment where modern Orientalism is truly born, where knowledge and the military were literally marching in lockstep. I'm talking about Napoleon's invasion of Egypt in 1798.
yes, a fascinating turning point.
It really is. Because Napoleon didn't just bring soldiers, he brought an army of intellect. He brought 167 scholars, biologists, chemists, and historians.
Quite the entourage.
Right? And the result of that expedition wasn't just a military occupation. It was the massive 23-volume encyclopedia known as the Description de l'Egypte. This was a highly strategic effort. They documented everything from the architecture to the local customs.
Which, you have to admit, was a monumental feat of preservation.
But how was it done? It was done by turning a living, breathing culture into controllable data.
Egypt was annexed to Europe not just by physical force, but by scholarship.
Oh, come on, annexed by scholarship?
Yes, it was literally turned into a department of French learning. Napoleon's scholars didn't just observe Egypt, they digested it, schematized it, and presented it back to Europe as an immutable law about the Oriental nature. The scholarship was the occupation.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You are equating the process of documentation with an act of violence, and I think that fundamentally misunderstands the nature of discovery.
How so?
Yes, the context was a military invasion. Napoleon's geopolitical motives were clearly about challenging British access to India and gaining glory. But does that political motive erase the historical outcomes of the scholars?
I argue that it taints them irreparably. Yeah.
But those French scientists discovered the Rosetta Stone. They laid the groundwork for modern Egyptology. They preserved antiquities that might otherwise have been lost to time or decay.
Sure, but
Let me ask you this. If a naval commander draws a map of a coastline to plan an invasion, does that imperial motive invalidate the geographical facts on the map? The coordinates must be accurate or the ships will crash.
well,
The map reflects a reality independent of the conqueror's intent. Why can we not separate the ambition of Napoleon from the scientifically valid achievements of the scholars he brought with him?
I hear the map analogy, but it completely ignores who paid for the map and what they intentionally left off of it. A map is never a neutral reflection of the Earth,
It's still geography, though.
but the map maker decides what gets placed in the center, what gets marginalized, what features are highlighted as valuable resources, and what is left completely blank. The Description de l'Egypte was a map, yes, but a map drawn by the conqueror for the conqueror.
But the physical landscape is still the physical landscape.
Only if you actually look at the landscape. And that brings us to one of the most powerful concepts in Said's book, what he calls the textual attitude.
Right, the preference for books over reality.
Exactly. If our listeners take nothing else away from this, the textual attitude is a psychological dynamic where a person trusts a book or a classical text more than the living reality standing right in front of them. Said uses a brilliant analogy. Imagine you read a book about a fierce lion. The book emphatically claims that all lions are fierce, terrifying predators. Then you go out into the wild and you encounter a docile, sleeping, perfectly calm lion.
And the textual attitude tells you to trust the book.
Exactly. You look at the calm lion and you say, well, the book says lions are fierce. Therefore, this lion isn't actually calm. It is just deviously hiding its fierceness to trick me. You force the reality to fit the text.
Wow. Yeah.
Westerners arrived in the Orient completely saturated with classical texts, biblical imagery, and academic assumptions. They didn't see the real people living there. They saw what their books told them they would see.
And Said applies this to specific scholars, right?
Yes, figures like Sylvester de Sacy and Ernest Renan, who placed Orientalism on a so-called scientific basis. I mean, Renan literally treated Semitic languages in what was described as a philological laboratory.
A laboratory.
Yeah. Now think about what a laboratory is. In a lab, you isolate a specimen, you pin it down, you strip it of its natural environment, and you define it entirely on your own terms.
Right.
The Western scholar created an artificial space where they spoke for the East. The Orient was silenced. This is captured perfectly in the Karl Marx quote that serves as an epigraph to Said's book. They cannot represent themselves, they must be represented.
Okay, that is a really compelling argument, but have you considered the philosophical trap that Said walks right into by making it?
What trap?
By insisting that the East was entirely Orientalized, that it was entirely constructed, silenced, and pinned down by Western texts, Saad's own theory inadvertently reduces the East to a passive victim.
I don't see how diagnosing a system of oppression makes the victim passive.
Well, think about the implications of what you just said about the laboratory. If the Orient is nothing more than a silent character in a story written entirely by Europe, then you are stripping the East of its own historical agency.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Right? You are erasing the incredibly complex ways that Middle Eastern, Asian, and North African peoples actually negotiated with, pushed back against, traded with, and even utilized European encounters for their own purposes.
But Said isn't writing a history of the Middle East, you know? He's writing a critique of Western discourse.
By portraying the West as this monolithic, omnipotent creator of discourse, and the East as a blank slate that just accepted being written upon, Said ironically reinforces the very binary he is trying to dismantle. He ends up treating the Orient as just as helpless and passive as Lord Cromer did, only Said does it out of sympathy rather than superiority.
Well, I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, honestly, because recognizing the immense weight of a systemic narrative does not mean you are endorsing the passivity of the oppressed. You are right, Said is doing a forensic analysis of the Western mind. He is examining the architecture of the European imagination.
Sure.
Look at how he analyzes the French novelist Gustave Flaubert.
Ah, yes. His encounter with the Egyptian courtesan, Kucha Khanum.
Yes, Flaubert writes extensively about her. But Said points out that she never speaks for herself in Flaubert's texts. She never represents her emotions, her history, or her perspective.
Right.
Flaubert, the wealthy foreign male, speaks for her. He tells his European readers what makes her typically Oriental. Said isn't saying that the real historical Kucha Khanum lacked agency in her actual life. He is saying the discourse of Orientalism systematically stripped her of it in the historical record.
Okay.
The overarching point is that the institutions, the vocabularies, and the imagery created by the West formed a highly durable, tightly knitted system. This wasn't just a collection of myths that could be easily blown away. It was an accepted grid for filtering the Orient into Western consciousness.
But a grid is not an impenetrable prison that completely halts the flow of reality. And this is why I keep returning to the nature of the scholarship itself.
Okay.
Let's look at lexicography, the making of dictionaries, or deep anthropological observation. Edward William Lane's Manners and Customs of the Modern Egyptians is a classic text of Orientalism from the 1830s.
Very famous, yeah.
Was Lane shaped by his position as a European? Undoubtedly. But the detail, the sheer amount of anthropological data he recorded about daily life in 19th century Cairo remains incredibly valuable to historians today, including Egyptian historians.
But it is still framed through a lens of inherent Western superiority.
Perhaps. But to discard the entirety of this academic tradition, to treat the study of historical texts and languages as nothing more than the disguised handmaidens of political imperialism, is a massive intellectual loss.
Is it, though?
I think so. It demands that we view every cross-cultural exchange through the lens of domination. If a European translates Arabic poetry because they find it beautiful, Said's framework forces us to look for the imperial motive.
Well,
that is a deeply cynical view of human interaction. It suggests that a human being is fundamentally incapable of looking across a cultural divide and seeing anything other than a reflection of their own will to power.
I don't think it is about cynicism, honestly. It is about accountability. It is about waking up to the fact that cultural strength is exercised just as effectively in the university classroom, the museum exhibition, and the dictionary as it is on the battlefield.
Right, but
you cannot study the history of ideas without studying the force of power that pays for those ideas. Orientalism proves that knowledge and power are inextricably linked.
I just don't think it is a perfect one-to-one correlation.
But look at the imbalance. The positional superiority of the West allowed the observer to constantly study, define, and evaluate the observed without ever facing a comparable evaluation in return.
That's true.
The West studied the East, but the East was not permitted the institutional backing to study the West in the same authoritative manner. That structural imbalance created a durable system of domination that didn't just vanish when colonial empires formally dissolved in the 20th century.
It evolved.
It mutated, and it continues to shape global perspectives, foreign policy, and economic interventions to this day. When we summarize what Said gave us, it is the undeniable truth that knowledge is never innocent.
And to summarize my position, I will affirm that while we absolutely must be hyper-aware of the political uses of scholarship, we cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater. We cannot reduce all cross-cultural study to mere imperialism without discarding centuries of genuine human curiosity,
real academic milestones, and the sincere desire to translate and understand the other.
I hear you.
If we accept that knowledge is entirely corrupted by the power dynamics of its era, then no knowledge is safe, and we are left with nothing but a cynical contest of competing political narratives. The discovery of a shared linguistic heritage across continents, or the decoding of the Rosetta Stone, they are triumphs of the human intellect, not just footnotes to empire.
Fair enough. Yet, despite our different angles of reproach, I think we have to acknowledge a profound point of convergence here.
Absolutely.
Whether one sees it as a perfect structural analysis, as I lean toward, or an incomplete theoretical framework, as you argue, Edward Said's Orientalism fundamentally and permanently changed the landscape of the humanities.
Unquestionably.
We can no longer look at the relationship between the observer and the observed in the same innocent way. He gave us the vocabulary to really question the authority of the expert.
I agree entirely with that. The innocence of the anthropologist, the historian, and the journalist is gone, and rightly so. Said forced the Western Academy to look in the mirror and reckon with the biases it had masked as absolute objectivity.
Exactly.
Where we continue to disagree is simply on the horizon of that reckoning. I believe it is still possible to achieve, or at least rigorously strive for, truly objective knowledge that eventually breaks free from the gravitational pull of political power.
And I remain convinced that power and knowledge are basically a binary star system. They orbit one another constantly, and you cannot look at one without being blinded by the light of the other.
That's a good way to put it.
But that is the exact tension that makes this material so enduring. You know, this isn't just a debate about 19th century linguists or Napoleon scholars in Egypt. It is deeply, urgently relevant right now.
Oh, absolutely.
When we watch modern media, when we see how foreign policy is debated, when we analyze how the other is constructed on our news screens, we are seeing the exact same mechanisms of Orientalism at play.
Yeah, it's a framework that really demands we pause and ask, who is holding the camera? Who is writing the script? And what are the political realities they are obscuring with their supposedly objective descriptions?
Which brings us right back to where we started, the image of the stranger from across the sea sitting at a desk, looking at you, and deciding exactly who you are.
It's a haunting image.
It is. We suggest our listeners dive deeper into Said's work and explore this intricate, challenging relationship between culture and empire for themselves. Think carefully about the stories you accept as absolute truth, and always check the ink in the pen that wrote them.